One would think that anyone in their right mind would have had enough at this point. But there were two issues in my life. Number one, I needed a fuck ton of drugs. 6 milligrams of Xanax a day, which came out to 3 pills that would be $5 a piece on the street. 90 milligrams of Roxy, at $1 per milligram. And that was just to maintain, not to get high. After what I had seen, I absolutely needed to get high. I had no other way of handling stress, and that was a lot of stress. The second was, I still had no idea what Carl's mother had turned into or how. She never showed up anywhere, and what was left of the crumpled pile that used to be her body was never identified by the police. I assumed, at the moment, that the thing puking its guts out on George's doorstep was her. From the part where it vomited her organs out, I was starting to wonder if there were any other Native American legends that I should be aware of before narking out in the future. Everything seemed relatively close to what the internet described as a Stigini, kind of like a vampire or a witch. What the reality of Cynthia's ability to fly around after vomiting out her intestines was, I had no idea. But I at least had the notion that we weren't the first people to tangle with him. I was still too stunned by a direct assault from something clearly supernatural to worry about poor Carl, who never learned what exactly happened, or the fact that the police seemed to want absolutely nothing to do with the multiple human beings turned to red goo in an expensive residential neighborhood. They said George's friend looked like he had been hit by a car, but that was bullshit. Both bodies had been splattered across the pavement. The cops didn't seem disinterested. They seemed like they were worried. 2 of them stood away from the bodies, watching the 2 roads that curved around the development. I noticed them both staring into the sky a lot. The police barely mumbled at me, but George talked at great length with one of them. They were smiling a few times, and during the week that followed, I learned that old George was close with a lot of police officers. Being a good old boy sure had its benefits, and as long as their relatives were kept in good supply of drugs, they were more than happy to ignore George. One of them stood off to the side, not speaking to anyone, just smiling. He was the only person who looked relaxed that night. He had jet black hair that looked like it had been slicked back with vegetable oil, it was so shiny. He was paler than most white Floridans. He wore a white long-sleeve button-down shirt with old-fashioned suspenders running up along either side from a black pair of pants, and a badge kept inside of a large black wallet. I tried not to pay attention to him, and it looked like the other police felt the same way. Somewhere, in all that thinking, I remembered that I had seen 3 of them at the beach, not just one. So I ended up crashing with Debbie for a while. It was a pretty nice pad anyways. She was in no mood for work either, so George ended up sending in goons to cover for both of us. George seemed strangely happy after the incident, even more relaxed than when I had first met him. He didn't exactly open up about what he knew, but I told him what I thought it was. I noticed a look of recognition on his face when I said it was a Stigini. He smirked and said that he was glad there was a way to get rid of them, but that he had only heard fleeting rumors about their existence. I didn't feel safe asking him about any other weird things. I was getting the impression he was never going to tell me anything he didn't think I already knew to begin with. I had the impression that he was lying, but he casually dropped that he didn't mind me staying over as long as I needed, seeing as he always had protection. Great. Now 2 reasons this asshole owned me. I spent a week recovering by narking out on a colossal supply of pretty much every abusable substance known to man, from shrooms to propofol. 3 days into the process, Dave dropped off a handgun for me. Someone had gone through all the loopholes for me, he said. And sure enough, the papers that came with it had my picture and said my name. I daydreamed about taking the small gray 9mm gun to a range, before remembering that I didn't actually know anything about guns, and putting the thing in one of my bags. I hoped I would never need it. Then I lurched towards a computer to see if I could find any more information on Native American legends that might be more than just legends. Before going back to work in the first time in about 8 days, I thought about stopping at my small one-bedroom hut. It didn't sound like a great idea, and I doubted something like whatever Cynthia was would just leave me alone. I eventually called my landlord and told him I didn't feel safe at my apartment anymore, and that I was giving him my notice. I hadn't bothered looking for a new place yet, but I never wanted to see that one or Debbie's place again. I booked a room in the brightly lit, expensive part of Palm Beach before going there one last time to pick up my drugs and anything else I might need. I looked forward to shopping at Marshall's for new clothes. I took an extra buttload of drugs my first day back to brace myself. No one seemed to give a shit. And Dave had kept an additional guy in the office, Steve, to hold down the fort while Debbie took some time to think about shit and recover. The next day at work was a typical day pumping tons of narcotics into the ignorant arms of people with southern accents everywhere. It was jarring to be around the smell and to see the stained light pour through the heavily tinted windows instead of enjoying the fresh air and bright blue sky that I had relished just the day before. About halfway through the day, at around 10 or 11, a beautiful old lady with long, flowing white hair and a blue Fleetwood Mac t-shirt came in with a group I was familiar with. She had piercing blue eyes you could practically see from across the street. She was new and filled out her patient packet while listening to music on an old cassette player. When she was finished, she bounded up to her group's ringleader, the junkie who fronted them the money, and took a serious amount of their pills. And he sighed before handing her what looked like a baggie filled with pills. She took them and barely hid them behind her cassette player before heading straight to the bathroom, presumably to cook and inject before her doctor's appointment. No more than 2 minutes later, a drop-dead, gorgeous young girl with bright strawberry blonde hair, shocking blue eyes, and a face full of freckles, wearing the same Fleetwood Mac shirt came out, dancing slightly as she walked. She was radiantly beautiful. I was numb to the fact that something weird was going on. Besides, she seemed pretty high, but in a good mood. I watched her, noticing that the shirt looked like it was brand new. She bounded up to the small stretch of the window that wasn't covered in tinting, and plopped down in an empty seat. She stared out happily while sitting next to a group of confused addicts. After just a moment, the beautiful blonde girl suddenly went stiff, as if shocked by electricity, her mouth open and slack, with her eyes wide, staring in the direction she came, the bathroom. She made a sudden gesture to the bathroom, something that looked like desperation, and then went still. A scream shot out of the bathroom the patients use. I looked towards the bathroom, but when I looked back to the window, the young girl was gone. The old lady with the bright blue eyes and matching Fleetwood Mac shirt had overdosed. Everyone in her group ran before the EMTs even came to get her corpse off the toilet. I wondered if anyone would be at her funeral. I didn't bother saying anything to Debbie. I spoke to Jessica, the girl who used to work in our medicine room, doling out medication in pill bottles for the doctor to sign off on, so that we didn't have to hire a legitimate pharmacist. Jessica was hired under an absurd legal loophole that allowed doctors to let regular staff dispense medication under insanely flimsy protocol, which we took advantage of so that we didn't need to hire anyone who might know what the fuck they were doing. Because of that, one of George's friends took the liberty of hiring a beautiful, surprisingly healthy-looking blonde whose only previous work experience had been working at Hooters and other fine Floridan establishments. She used an incredible array of machines that automatically sorted the pills by weight, measuring them out precisely every time. I mean, as far as we knew. The doctors then had to check the bottle and sign off on it, and that was enough to replace a professional with an advanced degree who might be interested in not letting those drugs hit the streets. She had the largest room to herself, with several massive vaults containing enormous stockpiles of medication that the doctors ordered in their own names so that they could self-dispense. We never talked, aside from coming and going. She didn't make much of an effort to hide her disgust for us drug addicts, and never left the medication room unless absolutely necessary, and we didn't blame her at all. I remembered her saying that when she went to high school in Hobie Sound, that she had heard of a girl who was attacked by something from the air. I remember a note of disgust in her voice when I talked to her, the sound of a girl who was grossed out by me, but trying to be polite. Hello? Hi. I need to ask you a question. It's kind of important. She sighed into the phone and sounded instantly disappointed. All right, what is it? I need to ask about that girl who disappeared in Hobie Sound. She didn't disappear. She was killed. Some of my friends got a phone call from her the night she didn't come home and said that she told them something came out of the sky and attacked her. She said she couldn't move her arm. The cops wouldn't even listen to them. She sounded instantly angry, as if I had challenged her belief that it was anything other than a legitimate concern. I was massively relieved to hear something other than, "We don't know." Her name was Claire Alyssa Redding, and her friend was Jeanette. They never found either body, but I was there when Claire called us. She said something attacked her, and she needed to get to a hospital, but she couldn't get through to 911. She said this as if it were the most important bit of information available. Did you remember them saying she said anything else? Anything at all? Someone I know may have gotten attacked by something near downtown Lake Worth, and they don't want to go to the police about it. She said she was digging for something when it attacked her. Grace, our friend, said she was doing a project for school. She had camped out on the beach and she said her car was torn up or something. They never found her car either. Only windshield glass and parts of the door. One of her friends went missing at the same time and they thought it was just a stunt because they both had been arrested a couple of times. For a quick moment, the mental image of the sorrowful father driving away in a critically wounded old Ford popped into my mind. Did she describe what was attacking her at all? Was there anyone who had any guesses? At this, she turned around, away from her desk and narcotic counting equipment. She spoke with a conspiratorial tone in her voice. The cops said it looked like she ran away, and that they couldn't find anything, but that was bullshit. My friends and I went back to the place she was digging when she called us. She was doing an assignment for a class on pottery shards in Hobie Sound. There are tons of Native American things buried up there. A whole city used to be there, before the Seminole even came to Florida. We found blood, some ripped pieces of her clothes, and some of her stuff in a tree. The cops said that they searched the crime scene and found nothing, and wouldn't even talk to us after that. She had friends, though, and they thought something jumped on her car roof and attacked her. That might be why she thought something came out of the sky. A lot of shattered glass was in the parking lot, and pieces from her car door. The realization that this girl was doing anything involved with Native Americans did not sit well with me. My stomach lurched. I'm sorry to hear that. Sounds like the cops just ignored it all. I said this in the most sincere tone I could summon, purely to remind her that I was on her side. She straightened up at that. I wish. One of them kept coming around to my friend Grace. He was one of the guys who was there when we called him the first time, who told us that she had probably gone missing. He kept bothering her and trying to get her to go clubbing with him. She was like 16 and he knew that, but he kept calling Grace. When it got too much and Grace called the police to file a report about it, they said they had never heard of the guy, and that only 2 cops went to talk to us, which is bullshit. Creepy dudes weren't exactly rare in South Florida, and this kind of thing was hardly unheard of. She seemed shocked by it, but I had heard of 1,000 stories of cops trying to get laid with more attractive perps, and they really stuck together. You could count on them to cover for each other before they even knew what they were covering for. Listen, I need to ask you something else. What kind of person was she? Was she like us? Did she party at all? Maybe there's a chance someone me or Debbie knows might have known her back in the day? Asking her whether or not her dead friend was a junkie wasn't easy. Yeah, maybe. Why? It might help if I knew if she was clean or not. This thing may have attacked my friend because of it. She probably wasn't. She did hang out with Grace, who used to do stuff whenever she got the chance. They had gone down to Miami together a bunch of times. A week before she died, they all went down to a party at South Beach with fake IDs, but had to leave early. Her friends, Grace and Chris, are still trying to look into it. Do you want their numbers? If you know of something similar, they might want to hear it. I wondered if she had guessed that maybe something not entirely natural had taken her friend, because she had a strange look on her face. But she seemed excited about connecting me to her friends. I said yes, and wondered if perhaps we were just sharing a hallucination before remembering the bloodstains in front of George's place. I wondered if the police had the same nervous look to them, like they wanted nothing to do with the case. After the latest bird-watching incident, I was suddenly more aware of every death, every creepy story a patient muttered. One patient got pissed and started screaming when he realized the cocaine his piss test was showing as positive for would delay him getting his medication until he watched a stupid tape on the dangers of mixing drugs. About 20 minutes total. Patience was never their strong suit. He looked like a college kid, except a hell of a lot grungier, with greasy brown hair that was matted to his head from a trucker hat he took off but kept in his hands. Aside from the wear and tear from heavy narcotics use, I didn't think he looked old enough to drink. He was wearing oil and paint-stained blue jeans, and a black and neon blue shirt that was torn under the arms, and his habit made him look worn down. He looked malnourished, with hollow cheeks and bones poking at the back of his skin. Like most patients, he looked like he never had any luck to run out of to begin with. Keeping Aaron from turning him into a fine red paste wouldn't be easy, and the patient just did not seem to realize that it was time to get polite, not curse the giant, multicolored muscle guy out. I was feeling generous, so I told Aaron I would handle it and pushed the kid through to his appointment. I remembered how bitchy I got when I was out. People act weird when they need drugs. At about noon, the 18-year-old kid had finished his appointment and was overdosing big time in the middle of the parking lot. His friends brought him in, and and a doctor rushed out to meet them with naloxone. Every junkie in the waiting room clapped when they realized he was going to be all right. 4 hours later, I got a phone call from a sheriff. He overdosed again, this time for good. His friends were actually much more responsible than normal and tried to go to an ER. He even stayed there after they realized he was dead. After his system was clean from the naloxone, the cravings kicked into high gear again. He must have been as sober as a judge after the stuff, because he apparently went through a huge part of his pills and OD'd. This happens more frequently than anyone would like to admit. At the time, I was mainly concerned with whether or not the police would be in the clinic again, but they decided not to. I Googled the name, though. According to his friend's Facebook post, he had just gotten back from the army and got hooked from a genuine back injury while on duty, and couldn't live with the pain or get better with anything the VA was willing to do. I pulled the file, but didn't feel the need to let Debbie know. After work that day, I decided I didn't want to be around anyone. I called the small hotel I was booked at, the Hotel Flagler, off of Avernia Street, to double-check my booking. And leaving George's place was a nerve-wracking relief. He had at least 5 goons there, all in brightly colored shirts with elaborate tribal or floral designs. I was both uncomfortable sleeping in the same house as them, and very comfortable, knowing that they'd double their numbers in the face of something that would scare the shit out of most people. The Aryan Brotherhood is less than scum, but holy shit does it understand violence. Debbie hadn't shown up to work for half a month at this point, and had taken to not getting dressed in the morning to begin with. After work, I went to George's place and began to gather the stuff that I had been using as a bug-out bag, including my new gun, which was in a case in my duffel bag. The Hotel Flagler was located just west of the Intercoastal Waterway that separates Palm Beach proper from the much larger and more heavily populated West Palm Beach, where us poor folk live. Built in the 1920s, it was cheap and used to be used for free housing for the poor, until it was repaired and turned into a luxury boutique hotel much later. It was just inland, right near Clematis and City Place, the 2 party destinations of the area. I wouldn't have armed criminals guarding me, but the amount of people in the area was reassuring. Before checking in, I went to the seawall that separates the land from the waterway. I decided to call Grace and Chris, Jessica's friends from high school, whose numbers she had given me. A tired-sounding man with a slight Spanish accent answered the phone. Hello? It sounded more like "hello," and the lack of Appalachian twang in his voice was strangely reassuring. Hi, I'm sorry to bother you, but my name is Wilkes. I'm a coworker of Jessica Grover. I need to ask you about 2 friends of yours that disappeared during high school. I left some space around the word disappeared, hoping he would notice that I didn't think she disappeared either. Alyssa and Jeanette. The voice had a matter-of-fact tone to it, but was still listening. Yes, something happened recently. We think it may have been the same thing. I was wondering if maybe we could meet sometime and talk about it. Maybe with Grace? You need to listen to me, and make sure to tell Jessica too. Grace is dead. He sounded very stern. I am so sorry. I had no idea. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. He cut me off right away. She died months ago. So if you see her, or if she contacts you, you need to run. Don't say a word to her. Not a single word. To her or that cop. I listened as he told me a place we could meet the following day, between where he lived in Miami and West Palm, a pier in Fort Lauderdale. He told me not to call him again, and asked me to tell Jessica the same before hanging up.